Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Mike on the Vikes. It's Josh here at JLimeate on Twitter. If you want to get in touch with me, and I appreciate episode ideas, anything you want to banter about. I love agreements and disagreements in terms of discussions and things like that. So, anything Vikings football, come let me know. MikeOnTheVikes.com is the website, Facebook page, all of that other yada yada yada. Tonight's episode, we're going to look at the circled games on the Vikings schedule. It's kind of the dredges of summer here. We have OTAs, which make everybody look like the next best thing. So instead of diving into the kind of the overreactions of OTAs, which I totally do, of course, and I know how ridiculous that is. You have everyone looking as good as they've ever looked, of course, and so we all fall into that trap because we're trying to get hyped up for our team. So I'm going to leave that analysis for later date, and hopefully there's more coming out of training camp when that comes up in a month or so, especially regarding the quarterback discussion. And so that's a little bit of a preview for what's to come. Definitely going to look at, I'll probably end up sharing with you all what my preferred method is, depending on the quarterback situation. And it's obviously in flux. I mean, the best player should play, but I don't want to get into too much of that right now because we're not there yet. We're just finishing OTAs, and everything looks great, right? So I wanted to take a little look at the schedule today and talk about the circled games that I think the Vikings should have on the schedule. At least I have them circled. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to kind of touch on a couple of the newsy moments of recent news moments, I should say, for the Vikings, and they're not super exciting, and I'm not breaking news by any means. I'm just perusing Vikings.com, following things on Twitter, just trying to see what's going on, right? Because that's what fandom is, right? You always try to figure out what's going on. So I'm not breaking any news or anything like that, but a couple things I think are noteworthy. We did get Dalton Risner back in the building, and that's important. I've talked about him on this podcast before. I've talked about him on other podcasts. I talked about him last year when we didn't sign him in time, and so it's just a weird thing, but he's back, and good on him. According to SpotTrack.com, it's my place I go when I want to look up contract details. There's nothing there yet, so I don't know if the full money details have been disclosed. If they have, and I don't know, I'm sorry, I didn't do a whole ton of research into it. My assumption is that either he didn't quite find what he was looking for on the open market in terms of someone who wanted to pay him a starter caliber deal, and then he finally accepted a lower offer from the Vikings, or everything was pretty competitive in terms of what the offer was for him, from him, and from us and from other teams, and maybe he genuinely deep down really wanted to return to the Vikings, and so in which case, great. Either way, great. I've talked about before. Yeah, I know he's not going to single-handedly make our offensive line the best offensive line in the league, but he is super consistent. He's started a ton of games, and I don't think you're going to hate having him at left guard if we need him to play left guard. So, I watched a couple episodes of Purple Insider, and the guys there were talking about Dalton Risner coming in and probably going to start on the depth chart as the backup to Blake Brandel at the guard spot. And so, again, that's a win-win for everybody, right? Because you have Blake Brandel, if he's stepping in and develops and takes that next step and becomes a starting caliber guard, and Dalton Risner's not good enough to start, that's great, because then you have depth. You have experience at depth. Dalton Risner proves that he's still the better option there, and then you have a guy that who has been in the game, what to expect. Again, he's a known commodity, for lack of a better phrase, and I think that can be important at times. And so we'll see how it all pans out through training camp and stuff, but I like that he's back in. I like that we figured it out. Again, I don't know why the delays happened. I know Risner was looking for a starter level deal. Maybe he couldn't find it elsewhere, or maybe it was close and he really wanted to come to Minnesota, so he gave us a chance to rethink. I have no idea what the details are, but the bottom line is he's back in, and at worst case scenario, he's depth. And best case scenario, he proves he's the best guard available, and we got him back on our team for this upcoming season. Because again, we have the tackle duo that you need to compete in terms of having a top half of the league offensive line. So we just need that interior offensive line to shore up and be able to open some holes for the running backs, and we'll be in good shape. So Dalton Risner back in Minnesota. The other kind of newsworthy item I thought was interesting is Ivan Pace is getting his old college number back. If you didn't see that, last year he played on number 40 because Marcus Davenport was number 0. And apparently, as soon as Davenport was left the Vikings, Ivan Pace was right in there saying, "Okay, can I have number 0?" Apparently, it was a big deal for him to get it back. It's what the number he wore all through college at Cincinnati, and so what makes an up and coming undrafted free agent with a chip on his shoulder who had an awesome rookie season? What makes him better? Well, getting his number and his vibe back, right? So, might be a small thing, may be a meaningless thing, but if that gets him even an inch more pumped up for the year, let's do it, right? That's awesome. So, those are the only newsworthy items I could even find. Again, we're in early June, so there's not a lot going on, I suppose. But what is going on is the schedule has dropped, obviously. You guys have all probably seen the Vikings schedule, which is actually relatively tough. I mean, I think the NFC North it should be considered a pretty good division, if not, one of the better ones in the NFC, because the Lions made it to the NFC Championship game last year, so they obviously would be the casual or the national favorite to win the division again. Everyone seems high on the Packers' up-and-coming offense, and they definitely showed signs of that last year. You have the Caleb Williams-led Chicago Bears, and you have the Vikings who, we're in our competitive rebuild, and say what you want about our quarterback situation. We have a great defense. We have the best receiver in football, and if we get one of our quarterbacks to play at an average to above average level, we're not going to be an easy out either. And so, when you factor in your 6 division games, we're in a tough division, and that's kind of my favorite thing about the schedule in general, and my favorite thing about divisions in general is if you have a winning record in your division, if you go 4-2, 5-1, you're just in a really good spot because you steal a couple games, maybe you get a little bit lucky in one of the other games, and all of a sudden you are right around 500, right? Your divisional games are so important. I think that matters, the way the league is structured, and so I like that aspect of it. So anyway, because our division is good, we have a relatively tough schedule in that regard, but we're also playing a ton of teams that should be competitive. Obviously, we have San Francisco, who I'll talk about in a second. Houston, won a playoff game last year, so even though they're young, they're going to be a tough game. You have the Jets with supposedly a healthy Aaron Rodgers, the Rams who made the playoffs last year, Jacksonville, even Tennessee to an extent, who has had a pretty good offseason, and could be a team that makes a little bit of noise. You have Indianapolis because obviously we got the AFC South, so there's some teams that will give us some trouble, obviously, and it's the NFL, so there's no easy victory, there's no easy W throughout a season. You have to take every game and treat every game with importance. But speaking of that, yes, you should treat every game with importance, but we all know that certain games have a little extra meaning. They have a little bit more, they feed the motivational parts of our brain a little bit more from a fan and player standpoint alike. And so I've highlighted 5 and parentheses 6 weeks of the season that I have circled on my calendar. And all I mean when I say that is, out of all the games, these ones are going to mean just a little bit more. Obviously, I want us to win every game. Obviously, I'm going to watch every game and overreact to every single game before and after. But if I were to look at the schedule right now, which I'm doing, kind of a fun summer exercise, these are the games that I'm circling for the Vikings. And give you the reasons why. So you can take a look on your screen. Here are those games, so you don't have to be left in suspense and limbo. Week 2, hosting San Francisco is the first one. San Francisco went to the Super Bowl last year. They won the NFC Championship game. They are the class of the NFC. And there's nothing that we've seen that would suggest that they're not going to have a shot to do that again. And so when you're looking at how does your team stack up against the conference that you need to come out of to get to the Super Bowl, you look to the best, right? And we have one of them in our division, Detroit. It's one of the best, so both Detroit games, but that's too obvious for me. The San Francisco game is a big deal. Last year, we beat San Francisco, and I believe it was I'm just going to check because I don't want to mess it up. Week 7. And we had just beaten the Bears. and after this we would go on to beat the Packers in Lambeau, but that was the game Kirk got hurt. But this was the second win in a streak of 5 wins that the Vikings had. And I know we had some fortune. Obviously, we had the Jordan Addison take the ball away from Charvarius Ward, 60-yard touchdown, right? That played a factor for sure. But Kirk threw for almost 400 yards, hit a couple touchdowns. Like, we beat the team that everyone said was going to be one of the better teams in the NFC. And so when your team does that, especially in week 7, so still first half of the season, you look at that and you say, okay, we have a shot, right? This, because presumably to get to the Super Bowl from the NFC, one of the teams you have to go through is probably the 49ers or whoever upsets them in the playoffs. But the 49ers are going to the playoffs. We all knew that last year. And so when the Vikings won that game, Kirk plays well. You just have a good vibe going. Our defense was way better than it was the year before. So at that point last year, I kind of felt like we'd arrived. I felt like, okay, this is a real deal. We have a real team, especially when we came out strong in Lambeau against the Packers. Again, it's all pre-Kirk Cousins injury, which obviously was the biggest factor in us not making the playoffs last year. So anyway, the first game I have circled for this year is Week 2 versus San Francisco. We go to New York to play the Giants in Week 1, then we come home and we host San Francisco, and whatever team we put out there Week 2, whatever quarterback, if it's Darnold because McCarthy isn't ready, or if it's McCarthy because Darnold is a backup forever now, who knows? But I want to see how we stack up against the 49ers, even in Week 2. And so, obviously, a win or loss doesn't necessarily mean anything in Week 2 because you're either 2-0, 1-1, or 0-2. Still plenty of different ways to go after that. And so it doesn't decide a season, especially it's early on. So you could argue that neither team will be firing on all cylinders, and that's totally fair. But what I want to see is, can we compete, right? Can we handle the Christian McCaffrey onslaught? Can we win or win enough in the trenches against the 49ers? Can we contain Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel? Like, where is this team at from a eye test standpoint at Week 2 against San Francisco? It's the first thing I'm going to look at and say, because if we play well, if we steal that game, if we play well and lose, but it's close, I'm going to be really optimistic going forward. Because again, it's so early in the season, it's not going to make or break our year. But again, you want to see how you test against the best. You want to see how you compete against the best. How many times have we seen teams get to the playoffs because their schedule's easy? They play a lot of bad teams. You look back and you're like, wait a second. They didn't play anybody. That's how they got this far, right? So you want to be the team that's played people and gotten far. And so I think that Week 2, right off the bat, we're going to get a good piece of evidence, I'll say, for the eye test about this Vikings team and maybe about the Niners too. Who knows? So that's game number 1 that I have circled. Fast forward a few weeks to Week 5, which is, shout out Tottenham Hotspur. Coys, come on you Spurs. That's my English Premier League team that I support, of course. By the way, they're very Vikings-esque. They're always close to being really, really good, but never quite getting over the hump. So in the one sport that I could have picked a team not from Minnesota, I picked a very Minnesota-esque team. But anyway, huge Tottenham Hotspur fan. And the Vikings get to host, quote-unquote, host the Jets in London at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. The nice thing is, I believe, and here I'm going to pull it up real quick again, I believe we go right into our bye week after that, which is nice. I don't know if I know they tried to do that. I don't know if it always works out that way, but whatever happens in London, the team goes right on their bye week. So players will have a chance to regroup, get back on, stateside time, things like that. And so timing-wise, I think it works out great for us. The other reason I have it circled is because the Jets are also a good team. They play in one of the best divisions in football as well because they have the Bills and they have the Dolphins, and who knows what the Patriots are going to look like. Probably not super great, but still 3 out of the 4 teams in the East should be competitive and should be considered playoff teams. Last year we didn't get to see what this Jets team could do because they didn't have a quarterback because Rodgers gets hurt in the first play. And so I think by Week 5 we'll be seeing a Jets team that has proven why they brought Rodgers in. I'm fully expecting the league to be on alert, be like, oh, Rodgers is still good, because he is, and the Jets had all the pieces around him last year. They just didn't have Rodgers, so this year they're going to be scary. And so kind of on one hand, it's kind of like another test to see where the Vikings are at, to see how we can compete against a team like the Jets. But that's for a lot of teams. I could have included Houston in that regard, but the Jets specifically because we haven't seen Rodgers in a while. It's been a while since we've played against Rodgers, and definitely not since he's been on the Jets. And so I just think you gotta, when you're the team that we've gone toe to toe with Rodgers a number of times in his career. It'll be really interesting, almost weird to watch him play the Vikings in a Jets uniform in London at my soccer team stadium. All of it's weird. So I'm circling that game because that is going to be a fun early Sunday morning, regardless of how it turns out. And I hope that, I hope we just dominate. I hope Brian Flores gets our guys to him for like 3 or 4 sacks that game. Obviously, that'd be great. But we'll see what happens. But that definitely is a game that's on my radar, a game that I've circled on the schedule for sure. Then I let a number of weeks pass before I chose Week 12 in Chicago. This is the Sunday after Thanksgiving, so Week 12 in Chicago. This is actually the first time we will be faced off against Caleb Williams. And the reason I chose it, because, you say rookie quarterback, okay, is it really that exciting? For one, it's not just any rookie quarterback. It's a rookie quarterback that was first overall pick, that was catered to by the Bears when they knew they were going to have the first overall pick. He's a talent that some people have said is better than was one of those generational talents that if you get him, like, you're in good shape. He could be ready right from the get-go. And on top of all that, we don't see him until Week 12. So that means he's had 11 weeks to get prepared, to be accustomed to the NFL. And so if Caleb Williams is the prospect that we think he is, if he's the player that we think he's going to become, or he's working towards becoming that player, by Week 12, even as a rookie, he should be pretty good. And if you're assuming, and as I am right now, that DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and a rookie Rome Odunze will have some more reps under his belt, obviously. If you're assuming their offense is clicking or is running smoothly, this is going to be a tough game for us, absolutely. In Chicago, it's always hard to win in Chicago as a divisional opponent anyway, with the weather, with the fans, with just the lore of being at Soldier Field. It's going to be a challenge regardless. And so if you put in a quarterback unlike any the Bears have ever had, if he's supposedly working in that direction, it's going to be a wild game, and it's going to be a really hard one for us to win. Like, we could, if Caleb Williams is who we think he is, Week 12, the Bears could be, 7-5. I haven't checked to see when their bye week is, so maybe they have a bye week and they're 8-3 or something. Like, who knows what the Bears are going to be like? Because from a roster standpoint, their defense was one of the best in the league end of last year. Their offensive weapons are right there. If Caleb Williams clicks right away, this Bears team is maybe the best team in the NFC North. Who knows? Like, I hate saying that out loud, but it's possible. And so we don't see them till Week 12. And so obviously we'll see the Bears against other teams, but I want to see them against the Vikes, and I'm a little nervous that we don't get like a Week 3 matchup where there might be some, things where Caleb Williams is still working things out, might make a few more rookie mistakes. Like, if he's got it figured out by Week 12, maybe by Week 8, Week 9, we could be looking at a really tough out in Week 12. So that's a for sure game I have circled on the Viking schedule so far for the 24-25 season. And then you have to include Week 14 then when we host Atlanta, because unless something crazy has happened, Kirk Cousins will still be the quarterback for Atlanta, so it'll be his homecoming to U.S. Bank Stadium. I've always been a big Kirk guy. I wish him the best of luck, but I hope we dominate in that game, as I do every game. But who knows what Atlanta will look like. They have a good roster. Last year, at times, it felt like they were a quarterback away, so they could be good, but at the same time, it's Atlanta, so I'm not super scared about it, like from a contention standpoint, right? In a perfect world, they are struggling, and we're fighting for a seed, and we do what we're supposed to, and we win. But I would say from a like a logical standpoint, or from a realistic standpoint, Atlanta is in better position in terms of experience and roster build to be more successful than the Vikings. So we could also be looking at a Week 14 matchup where the Falcons have a better record than us, and it would be an upset for us to win. But it doesn't matter about that for this one. This is all about Kirk coming back home. I hope the fans treat him with respect. I know some people will still forever be mad when a player leaves to go get more money, but don't do that. the lifespan of careers in the NFL is so short, and I know they make tons of money. I'm not saying we should feel bad for them, but at the same time, if you're a player that can get a longer commitment with more money, you know, yeah, I don't fault anybody for doing that, right? Not everybody is Mike on the Vikes, who grew up in Minnesota, who would hate to play for any other NFL team, right? Even if I didn't ever couldn't even get close to even thinking about that or anything like that. But my point is, it's not like Kirk Cousins was a born and raised Minnesotan who was desperate to play for the Vikings, right? He was a Michigan State guy, all that stuff. So if I'm sure there'll be people that will boo because they'll say, "Oh, you took all that money, even though we had a shot to keep getting better, et cetera, et cetera." Don't do that. Cheer, applaud for him. Applaud for him to be back. He's easily a top 5 quarterback in Vikings history, if not a top 3 quarterback in Vikings history. So let's bring him back with respect, but then let's beat him. Let's respectfully beat the Falcons and prove that we didn't need him at the same time. So it's a little bit of hypocrisy here for Mike on the Vikes tonight, I suppose. But the point being, obviously everyone's got that game circled. That probably was the first one I circled when I looked at the schedule. There's no decision need to be made. It's Kirk Cousins coming back to Minnesota the year after he takes the big contract and leaves. So absolutely on the schedule. So those are the first 4 games. We have week 2 versus San Francisco at home. Again, testing are we with the cream of the crop in the NFC? I don't know if we are right now. On paper, it doesn't look like it, but it's June 1st. So what does that mean? Nothing. Obviously, the battle with Aaron Rodgers in London against the Jets in week 5. Our first look at Caleb Williams in week 12, and then Kirk's homecoming in week 14. And then I saved the best for last / the one I cheated on. My 5th and final, circled game that I have on the calendar is actually 2 games, and it's weeks 17 and 18. We host the Packers in week 17, and then we travel to Detroit in week 18. And it's kind of a trend where we end the season with some divisional games. If you factor in the fact that we don't play the Bears for the first time until week 12, I think we play them in week 12 and week 15. So here you have, between weeks 12 and 18, 4 divisional matchups. Actually, let me just confirm that. Who knows if there's even more. So we got the Bears in week 12, the Bears in week 15, and then Green Bay, Detroit, 17-18. You have 4 huge divisional games in the end of the season. The reason I lumped those 2 together is because I circle these on the calendar every year, because in my head, again, this is Mike on the Vikes, there's some delusion here. In my head, these games are meaningful for either playoff seeding or for the division itself, right? And so if we're even near wild card, or if we still have a mathematical shot at the division, obviously the game against Green Bay and then the final game in Detroit are going to be huge games. So you have to circle those because it's how you wrap up the season. You never like losing to your rivals at the end of the year, and especially if they mean something, if those games mean something, it's a big deal. And so I appreciate that the Vikings play the Packers at home in week 17. I think our Lambeau game is way early in the season. Yeah, our Lambeau game is September 29th. And so week 4. And so we don't, knock on wood, I don't think we'll have to deal with the cold weather and things like that. Not that that's a thing that, you just have to deal with it when you have to deal with it. But I think for our team, don't think we'll be too many games over 500, and so we might need all the advantages we can get. And so getting the Packers at home in week 17 should be huge for us, along with then going to Detroit in week 18, which will be a tough matchup regardless. But the thing is, this Vikings team, we have the offensive coaching and the offensive weapons where if our quarterback play is average, we will be able to put up points, right? And then when you look at our defense, the return of Brian Flores, getting Dallas Turner in, and just another year for some of these guys in that system, our defense should be good. Like it's. I know it's easy for me to talk myself into this, but I feel like for everybody, we should at least be competitive, right? And when you're competitive in the NFL, maybe you win the turnover battle and you win more games than you lose, right? Maybe you get a lucky bounce here and there, or a lucky Addison takes the ball away from Charvarius Ward, and you win a game against a team that people didn't think you could win a game against. And so, obviously, optimism's high. It's June 1st, but who knows? And that's why when I look at the schedule, my first thought was, wow, it's a tough schedule. And then I'm like, nope, it's the NFL. Every game's tough. Every game's important. and you can pick it apart and try to make predictions, which I'll probably do at some point in the near future. Maybe the next one is my projected record for the Vikes this year. But for now, we're just looking at storylines, and the games you see on the screen right there are, in my opinion, at this moment in time, the circled games for the Vikings. To give you a little frame of reference, last year, one of those games would have been the Cincinnati game, because that was another one of those games where I thought testing ourselves against a Super Bowl contender. But of course, in that game, it was Nick Mullins versus Jake Browning. So, we should have won. We lost, but it was one of those things where once the season rolls around and you know who's hurt and you know whose record is what, it does kind of lose its luster. So that's why I wanted to do this now, as everything stands on paper, as the schedule looks like. These are the games that I have circled. And so I'm going to go through them one more time, just for the folks that are only listening on the podcast and not watching on YouTube. But week 2 at San Francisco, we host them, or week 2 against San Francisco at home, because this is who you want to see how you stack up, right? If you can beat San Francisco, if you can run with San Francisco, you can run with everybody in the NFC right now. They're the class of the NFC. Obviously, they made it to the Super Bowl last year. Week 5 in London against the Jets. First time we've seen Rodgers since he's left the Packers, and the Jets should be a good team as well. They have a good defense as well, and so it'll be just a fun matchup. It'll be a fun week. We get up and watch Vikings football at 8:30 in the morning, so we don't have to wait all the way till noon, right? And then the Vikes get a bye afterwards. So if we're complaining about the schedule, they just power through that game, and then they can take a break. Week 12 at Chicago will be a super interesting matchup. It'll be our first look at Caleb Williams, and so in my head, because I think he is going to be a good prospect. In my head, he's by week 12 he'll have some things figured out, and assuming his weapons are healthy, it's gonna be a hard player to stop. So that should be an interesting game. We have the Kirk Cousins homecoming a couple weeks later in week 14. Obviously, can't wait to see Kirk back. It's going to be so weird. I remember last year watching our preseason game against the Panthers and seeing Adam Thielen in Carolina Panther blue, and I was like, no, it's weird to me. It's very weird to me. And you'd think I'd get used to it. This is the era of free agency. Players move all the time. It's still super weird for a guy like Adam Thielen. Mankato State Viking colors, right, all the way through to playing purple and gold for the Vikes, and seeing him in Carolina blue is just very bizarre. But I expect to have it look equally as weird when Kirk Cousins rolls into town with the Falcons. So that's the fourth one. And then again, I cheated at the end. Instead of having one single fifth game circled on the calendar, I combined weeks 17 and 18, hosting the Packers, going to Detroit, 2 big key divisional matchups where in my head that means this is the division on the line. And some of you are going to listen to this and say, division on the line, we're the worst team in the division. There's not going to be any competitive reason to watch these last 2 games. And so it depends on where you stand on the outlook for our Vikes going into the 2024-2025 season. But either way, those are the games I have circled. It's June 1st. I'm really excited for more things to have happen. So it was kind of fun looking at the schedule, though, because then I got to get psyched up and, create all these storylines in my head to make it interesting. But I'll be hopefully looking for some more exciting things as training camp comes around. Maybe a Justin Jefferson contract sometime soon. Closed circuit to Kwesi. Let's get that done, right? So we can get him back on the field, et cetera, et cetera. But either way, appreciate anyone that took time to listen. This has been Mike on the Vikes. This is Josh. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. It'd be helpful to me. Get the word out there that there's yet another person talking about Vikings football. So once you've gone through all the professional avenues, come to my low budget production and get some extra delusion, extra analysis. You can find me at MikeOnTheVikes.com, on Facebook, etc., at JLime8 on Twitter, and the Mike on the Vikes podcast is anywhere you listen to podcasts. But enough of that rambling. Have a great rest of your weekend. Those of you who operate on a school schedule, have a good last week of school. It's coming up here for Minnesotans. And then start to enjoy the summer weather. Stay safe from mosquitoes and all that good stuff. Mike on the Vikes out. Peace.